the Spanish Steps. We hit the Trevi Fountain. We hit Piazza Navona, just walking around, and they're behind us. And I heard them talking to each other saying, gee, Papa and Nona really know their way around Rome.
Welcome, everybody, to this episode of Dadnormous. I'm very thrilled to be with Marty Cammarata today. Thank you so much for joining me, Marty. And I'll ask you to share a little bit about who you are and where you are as a dad and grandfather in your world right
now. Hi, my name is Marty. A lot of my friends and associates call me Martino because the time I spent traveling all over the world, people had a hard time with the word Martin. I was a kid born in Brooklyn, lived in Brooklyn until I was about 11. My folks realized that we were living in a war zone in East New York. And then they bought a house on the South Shore of Long Island where I kind of grew up. And I ended up graduating high school there. My parents separated during my junior year in high school. So I remained at that school living with friends, graduated, was a basketball player and a big athlete. And then I went to college. I did not stay in college daytime because I just couldn't afford it. And my mother didn't have a lot of money. So I ended up going to night school, and I got a job working in the garment center where I met my wife. So we've been married for 54 years. And my first job was working for a telecommunications company in New York City known as Western Union International, which was separated from Western Union when the FCC separated domestic and international telecommunications. But the great thing about that company was that out of the 25 or 26 people on the sales force, I was singled out to be reassigned to Paris. So we were married for 2 years, and we moved to Paris in late April 1968. And those of you who were around at that time may know that that was a time when the students were rioting. The entire country was shut down. Everything was shut down. No gasoline, no cars, no public transportation, nothing. The only thing working were red lights and green lights. So Jill and I were holed up in a hotel for 3 months. And we basically ended up being the only people in a hotel, and that includes no staff. So we were using a hotel restaurant facilities, cooking our meals when we needed to. But during that period of time was the beginning of the Vietnam Peace Conference in Paris. And I was able, through my connections at the Ministry of Post and Telecommunications, I set up a telex bureau in the American Press Center. And so for probably close to 2 weeks, Averil Harriman and Cyrus Vance were daily friends. We knew all of the journalists. We were, of course, taking their stories, and I had a battery of telex operators from my London office that came over to Paris, and they transmitted their stories back to the newspapers in the States. And of all of the telecommunications companies that could have done it, I was the only one. So Jill worked the table, and we did that. And at night, when the press conference closed down, we walked back to a hotel, changed our clothes, and we auto stopped, which is hitchhiked, back to our apartment in the 16th arrondissement with cans of paint because we were painting our apartment. Using that time, we had this apartment taken over from the guy who replaced, and it had never been painted. It was a beautiful apartment, but it had never been painted. So we ended up accomplishing that. And when the Vietnam Peace Conference ended during the Prague Spring, when everybody said, okay, we're done in Paris, let's go to Prague, that's when the conference ended, and we took a real long vacation. And that's when Jill got pregnant with our first child, a son. He was born in 1969, in February 69. So we ended up spending 3 years in Paris, and then my boss was in Rome, and he was in charge of Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. And I had seen him a couple of times and spoke to him on the phone quite a lot. And he finally said to me, "Okay, you're coming to Rome. I need you to be my #1 assistant." So Jill, by that time, was pregnant with child #2, and she begged to stay in Paris, where she had an English-speaking doctor, and we had friends, and we had a big relationship at the American hospital in the town of Neuilly, just outside of Paris. And the company said, "Get yourselves to Rome right now." So we did, and so we ended up staying in an apartment for a couple of months. We found a great apartment in the #2 tennis club in Rome, where there was a series of small, low-level apartment buildings, but we watched the best tennis players in Italy for the next 5 years. So we ended up spending 5 years in Rome, traveled all over Europe, parts of the Middle East, and our second child was born in Salvatore Mundi Hospital, which is the Vatican hospital. And the funny part of that was that when we walked into the hospital, in Latin, and a big sign in the maternity ward was this sign that said, this is a Catholic hospital, and in the case of saving the mother or the child, we will save the child because it has not sinned. So, of course, my wife spoke to the doctor about that. She said, "Oh, wow. Don't think so." So he said, "Sit down, Mrs. Cammarata." He said, "I've been practicing for 30 years. I've never lost a mother yet." So that comforted her. A child was born, my daughter, Deana, who turned out to be a really fantastic young lady right now. She's started her own business, and she spent 2 years living in South Africa. So we came back to the United States in 1975. We moved into our house in Scarsdale and spent the next 45 years making a life for ourselves in America. But I think that the most important thing that happened to us in our lives was that 8-year experience in Europe, where we truly became Europeans. And we would have stayed there if the opportunity was there, but there was no opportunity to stay. So we live a life that's somewhat, I would say, 50% European and 50% American culturally. It changed our diet. I tell my doctors I've been on the Mediterranean diet for 50 years. So so now we have, after 45 years, we've moved to Somers, New York. We moved about 3 months ago, in the beginning of May, and we're in a process of making it our home. And as I said, I may have said before, we're not looking back. This is our home now. We love it. It's in a great little community. The only thing is that, I can't do anything until I get approval from my condo association and the Vatican.
Yeah.
So that's where we are.
So let me ask you, so thank you so much for the detail, and it does paint, and I know you for several years, and it does paint an even richer picture. So if you can think back, and all the things that were happening in your life at that time, first, obviously in Paris, when you first found out that you were expecting, you as an expectant dad, what was your first reaction back then?
Well, I was happy, but I was immediately nervous. And, it's very easy to be a father because you don't have to do any of the work, really. But Jill did a lot of work. But I think from the very beginning, I was one of these guys who was supportive and made her life, as comfortable as I could living in a foreign country. Her biggest complaint was that she didn't know anybody. Sure. And she couldn't get around. She couldn't drive, and she couldn't work. By luck, one of my clients in Paris worked at the Intercontinental Hotel, and she was lamenting to me one day that she was English, her husband was French. So I said, "I got a friend for you."
That's great.
They're still friends. They're still friends, and she and Jill spent the next 9 months traveling around Paris using public transportation. and just learning as much as she could, as much as French and culture and food. And of course, the markets were the key for us. I mean, I'd never seen anything like that in my life.
Right.
I could swear that the vegetables we were buying were in the ground in the morning. That's how fresh things were.
And they likely were. So that's incredible.
Yeah.
And when you think about that and your experience as a new dad to your son, and then transition a couple of years later to Rome, and your experience when you first found out you were expecting your second child, how old was your son at the point you found out you were expecting Deana?
He was 2.
He was 2?
So we moved to Rome with him 2 years old, which meant that Jill had a lot of work on her hands. But luckily, where we lived in this complex in Rome, there was a fabulous swimming club and a restaurant on top of a hill. It was like heaven. It was just the greatest. The weather was the best. The food was the best. And I drove to work every day in a Mini Cooper.
Beautiful. The old originals. So when you think back to like all the collective experiences internationally, domestically, building a life in the United States, incorporating all these aspects, if you could go back to Paris and whisper in Martino's ear some advice that you think after all these years would have helped you as a dad in the past 50 years, what advice would you give yourself back then? If you zoom out and look really broadly.
Well, that's an interesting question. I have to think about that, but mostly we were totally on our own. And so we had no experience. We had no, there was nobody there who would say, you know, this is what you do as a dad, or this is what you do as a mom. The friends that we had were mostly in the international community, and few of them had kids. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of trial and error, you know. We learned, Jill read Dr. Spock, and she tutored me in Dr. Spock, and I listened. And mostly it's trial and error. You know, you say, okay, this is my kid. This kid is a combination of my wife and myself. I have to raise this kid. I have to take care of this kid. I'm going to change his diaper. I do the 3 o'clock feeding. I did everything. And most of the people we knew did not. You know, the guys didn't want to know anything. I mean, we had friends who would say to their wives, well, you know, I've held a baby for 5 minutes. It's yours now.
So when you think about this now, when you think about the cumulative time of your fatherhood, you being a dad, if you had an opportunity to do something over, is there something that jumps out at you that if you had a chance to take a mulligan, you would go back and redo something?
Yeah. I unfortunately allowed myself to lose it sometimes emotionally when the kids wouldn't behave. And that was the wrong thing to do. Of course, you know, I hated myself when I did it, but sometimes your emotional reaction when you've got something really important over here and the kids are over there and they're creating such a scene that you can't concentrate on anything, you know, you have to take it into consideration. These are infants. Sure. And so, you know, we didn't have anybody to call up. I couldn't call up my mom was around. My father, as I said, my parents separated, and then I had no relationship with my father practically my entire life. So I had no role model. It turned out that the role model that I adopted was Jill's father.
Okay.
But they were in the States and we were in Europe. So, you know, I'm just sort of creating life as on a daily basis.
Right.
It was really tough, and I regret sometimes that I did things differently. When now, as an older person and as even a grandfather, I think I would have done it I should have done it differently. But I did not make those mistakes with my grandkids.
Okay.
Because I spoiled the hell out of them and gave them back.
So that brings us to that point. This is exciting for me because this is the first time I've had this conversation with someone who's a grandfather. So can you remember first find out you were going to be a grandpa? How long ago? How old are your grandkids now?
Well, they range 7, 17, and 19. So they're very important people in my life. My son Justin and his wife Jamie have a child, a 7-year-old boy named Harley, who's about to enter 2nd grade. He's a bright little boy, and he has his own YouTube channel. And he feels the need to FaceTime me on a daily basis, which I absolutely love. Deana has 2 boys, Clayton, who is about to turn 20. He goes to the University of Vermont, and he wants to be a veterinarian, but he's also a super athlete. And he was on championship soccer teams and volleyball teams while he was in high school in Africa. And his younger brother, Carter, who is also a super athlete, was probably the best 12-year-old soccer goalie in Vermont when he lived in Vermont. He changed to volleyball and basketball and was on championship teams also in Africa. And he wants to, when he graduates and goes to college, he wants to be in sports management like his dad, who works for the National Basketball Association. So those are my grandkids and my in-laws. They're very important people in my life. 19. So I'll tell you exactly what happened. I remember the day like it was yesterday. My daughter and her husband were living in Jersey City. And she was pregnant. No, she wasn't pregnant. She was working. And they were living in Jersey City, and we made an appointment to go down and meet them and take them out to dinner. So we get to their apartment, and we saw that my daughter and her husband were kind of talking behind closed doors. They'd come out and talk to us a little bit, then go back behind closed doors. And I looked at Jill and I said, maybe they're having an argument or disagreement. So a couple minutes later, they both entered the room where they were, and we were sitting in the living room, and they said, "Mom and Dad, we have something to tell you." And I'm sort of clenching my fist saying, "Here we go." She says, "I'm pregnant." And I felt a thrill coming over me, and I said, "Gee, Deana, I'm so young, I'm not ready to be a grandfather." She said, "It's not about you, Dad." And she put me right in my place. So yeah, that was when I found out I was going to be a grandfather. The second time was a lot easier.
So when you think about this in retrospect over the last 19, 20 years, and then going back for the last 50, in what ways is that news the same, and if at all, and what ways is it different than finding out you're going to be a dad? Because does it resonate in a different tone? Is it totally different? How does it hit you?
I think so, because the sense of responsibility isn't there. When you bring a child into the world, you're responsible. I mean, this is the toughest job in the world, and the most dangerous job in the world. I remember when Justin was born and we didn't know which end of the baby to hold. One of the doctors, it was a doctor or maybe it was one of the nurses at the hospital, said, "Listen, you guys, babies are indestructible. Don't worry about it." And that turned out to be pretty true, because after that, we stopped worrying about this or that. And, they survived and they thrived. And, now they're 51 and 49, and they're parents themselves. And the oldest boy is about to turn 20, and he's in college,
Wow.
Which is a thrill. I mean, it's just amazing. But one of the great things that happened with our first grandson, Clayton, he was, I guess, 1.5 when Deana and her husband decided that they couldn't live in Jersey City anymore. And she couldn't work because she had an infant. So we had a big house in Scarsdale, and we said, listen, you guys, come and live with us. We have a bedroom. We have a bedroom for you guys. We have a bedroom for the baby. You'll spend as much time as you need here. And their opportunity, or their desire, was to save money so they could go out and buy a house. So that ended up being a year and a half. So we had our grandson there for a year and a half. So we, for all intents and purposes, we were parents again. And very funny things happened when Jill and I would hear the baby crying in the middle of the night. We both get up and rush into the baby's room and bump into my daughter, who got there first and said, I'm the mother. Put us in our place again. And we put up her hands and said, you're right. Okay. You know, we heard the noise. So that was just another one of those funny experiences. But we had more fabulous one-on-one time with that little boy. And to this day, we feel that he's our son in many respects. He's a special kid, and he's about to turn 20. He's in college, and you know, of course, college these days is not what he thought it was going to be.
Sure.
As all the kids are finding out. But that was a very special experience that we had. And then we ended up taking him on vacation for a week at a time for many summers. He just went out to the Hamptons with us and spent a week with us. And that was also very special because his parents weren't around, and, you know, we were it.
Yeah.
Of course, it's very nail biting because, you know, if anything ever happens to him, and sometimes it did, you know, we were responsible. I can remember a phone call to his mother one day saying, you know, gee, you know, everything's fine, but Clayton cut his chin falling off a chair, and we're on our way to the hospital, but everything's okay. And she's, you know, silence on the other end of the phone. But, you know, that's one of life's experiences.
Yes, it is. And you bring up an interesting point also, which is, I like to talk about this, is legacy. So when you think about your legacy as a dad, as a granddad, and you think about, if you can imagine your grandson, Clayton, speaking about you when he's 50 years old, what are the aspects of you being his granddad that you want him to feel and to be present in his life when he's 50 and he has perhaps his own family, perhaps his own grandchildren? And he talks about grandpa.
My name is Papa.
There you go. That's my dad, my grandkids too.
And he was about 2 years old, sitting in the kitchen with everybody sitting around the table, and we weren't around the table. He was just, you know, learning to talk. And when it came to me, they said, well, what's his name? And he hesitated, and he says, Papa. And I said, I'll take it.
There you go. Perfect.
So now I'm Papa. I think that Clayton would say I had a special relationship with my grandfather. I felt in many respects that he was like a parent. I could call my grandfather and talk to him about anything that I felt I didn't want to talk to my parents about, and it would stay just between us. I had that special relationship with him, and he taught me lots of things. We read him a lot of books, and we took him to parties where he, at very early age, would sort of entertain people. He was a special kid. He was born with a great ability to absorb knowledge. And so we fed him big words, and he remembered the words and he used them in context. He and his brother a few years ago when he was 16, his brother was 14. We took them to Europe, go to the city where your mom was born. And so we picked a day, because they're both athletes, and we picked a week, 10 days actually, and during Thanksgiving. And we took them to Rome. We got off the plane, we took the ride into town, we threw our suitcases in a hotel, and we said we're gonna go out for a walk. So we hit the Spanish Steps, we hit the Trevi Fountain, we hit Piazza Navona, just walking around, and they're behind us, and I heard them talking to each other saying, gee, Papa and Nona really know their way around Rome. Surprise, surprise.
Yeah.
So then we took them to, what was it? Well, we went to Pompeii. They expressly wanted to go to Pompeii, and they loved it. They absolutely loved it. And then we took the bullet train after 5 days in Rome. We took the bullet train to Venice, which they absolutely loved. And after the first day walking around, they took us around.
Great.
And this is something. Clayton had been to Europe before; his brother had not. But they remembered things. And what really strikes me is that years after, this is now what, 3-4 years later, they remember many aspects of that trip to Rome that they never discussed with us. And it comes up in conversation sometimes, and I'm really pleasantly surprised that they really remembered that fabulous restaurant we took them to, or eating artichokes in the Jewish Quarter. And I remember one of the boys sending an email to his mother. We found out from his mother saying, "Gee, Mom, the food here is even better than Nona said." So I think those experiences, plus playing basketball with the boys, they're both great athletes, and playing soccer with them, and going hiking, and all these things that we do as a family, they made a big impression on these boys. And so I think they're going to say that we had a special relationship with both their grandparents. They also have grandparents on the other side.
Great.
And we shared these opportunities, but we have taken them, we have done a lot of things with them that they will never forget. And I think those things will resonate with them when they're fathers and even grandfathers.
That's fantastic. So when you think about being a dad and being a granddad, is there any advice or thoughts you'd like to share? So we've had people on the show already this time who have a 3-month-old, their first child. We have, we're building a spectrum of people from all walks of life and kids at all ages. And someone watching this who's about to be a dad or is a new dad, what advice would you give them based on your tenure with that?
Well, I would say, and I think this is becoming more prevalent today, your wife can't do it all on her own. And you need to take some of the burden, even if that means cooking meals, learning how to cook meals, changing diapers. I know a lot of guys won't do that. And I would change diapers. I would do the 3 o'clock feeding. In many cases, I would say to Jill, "Don't worry about the baby, I'm changing diapers." And she'd say, "No, it's my turn." And so I would say that for future fathers, just absorb the awesome responsibility and share the burden with your wife for the care and feeding and the raising of this child.
That's great. Thank you very much. So we're going to get wrapping up in a second. So are there any other thoughts you want to share? We spoke about looking back and advice you give yourself. We spoke a lot about where you were in your world, you and Jill and the family. So anything you want to share in conclusion?
Yeah, I would say to people, you never stop parenting. And even today, when my kids, who are not young, everybody's got issues and problems and circumstances that arise. We are the go-to people. And so you're the parent and you're the grandparent, but you always bear that responsibility. And when the time comes that we're not around, the mantle is passed to them. And I remember when, my parents had separated. My mother passed away many years ago. My father passed away, but I never had a relationship with my father. And this is a point I sort of thought about when I was preparing my head to talk to you, was that my father was a difficult person and really not a good father. So I never had a father. So when I lived with this family in high school, their father took me in as if I was his son. So did the mother. And I was unbelievably impressed with that. And I still am very good friends with the son, who decided that he wanted his parents to take me in. And so after that, it was Jill's father who became my go-to guy, and he was my leader, and he taught me a lot of things. But you know, you become the person you are by the experiences you have with other people. And so I never really looked for a mentor or a father figure, but I had just adopted some of the great things I saw from people, and it helped me shape my view towards being a husband and a father. And you know, so everybody has different experiences. So I would say, um, don't 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 give up on the relationships you have, especially with family, because that's all you have, basically speaking. Um, and um, and you know, try to be as good at it as you possibly can.
Great. Thanks so much, Marty. I really appreciate your time today and all that you've shared with us. And I really do feel it's a valuable perspective to have for dads at all stages of the job, all
It
stages.
is a job.
Yep.
Thank you for the interview. Appreciate it.
So much. I really appreciate it. For those of you that are new, please subscribe. Take a look at the other videos I'll post here, and I look forward to seeing you on a future episode. Thank you very much.
Bye.